Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host, Maqbool, with you at BTV World. In today's show, we're going to be taking a look at two important stories. The first is in reference to the letter that has been written by the United States President Joe Biden to the Prime Minister of Pakistan, in which he has pointed out a number of areas that can strengthen the bilateral relationship between the two countries, and said that the United States will continue to stand with Pakistan for an enduring partnership on a number of areas, which include education, trade and investment, and most notably climate change as well, as part of the Green Alliance. And so this is something that we're going to look into further, because this is the first direct communication between the top leaderships of both the countries in quite some time now. And of course, in the meanwhile, while there was none, there was also, of course, the controversy with regards to the former Prime Minister and founder of the PTI, which of course brought the US into a controversy, which affected the political scenario of Pakistan and also impacted the relationship between the two countries, where the US was blamed to be part of an ouster of the ex-Prime Minister in line with elements within Pakistan. And this is something that was accused of as part of the political narrative, and on multiple occasions as well. Something, of course, that the US denied, and of course later the government and the military leadership of the country has also denied. And then of course the rest is history. There's a lot of discussions with regards to what this letter entails, how exactly will this partnership foster, and what sort of areas are going to be taken a look at. So we'll discuss them in further detail in the show. Our next segment is going to be taking a look at the situation in India prior to the elections. We've discussed this before as well, in the way that we have seen the kind of crackdown on opposition parties that we have seen, most notably on Congress, with the arrest of their leaders as well. And there's also, of course, concern with regards to the kind of measures that have been taken to cripple the party economically just prior to the election, something that the Congress party leaders have also accused the state as well for, with regards to what they have claimed as tax terrorism, something that has been done against them. And this is coming after some of the bank accounts were frozen last month, and then now a huge amount has been demanded to be paid in taxes by the Congress party, which has claimed that they will be left with nothing for the elections after this. And this is just something that is being targeted to further cripple the party. And so we're going to try and understand what is going on ground, and why is it that this is happening, and then what exactly will the Congress be doing, and the options that they have available, considering, of course, it been one of the major parties of the country, and most major party of the country for many years of its existence, since of course until of course the BJP took over. So we're going to be discussing that in our next segment, and for this and more, as always, in the studios we've been joined by senior analyst Farrukh Pitafi and Raja Faisal. And for our first segment with regards to the US and Pakistan relationship and the letter written by Joe Biden, we've been joined by Mr. G.R. BALUCH, who's a former ambassador, and Mr. Michael Kugelman, who's a senior analyst, and they've both joined us online on the debate. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being part of the discussion. Michael, welcome to the show. It's been a while since we've seen you, and Ambassador Saab, you're almost a regular on our show now, so it's good to see you again as well. I'll start with you, Ambassador Saab, with reference to, of course, what has been going on previously in terms of the kind of relationship that we've had with the US historically as well, and then the kind of controversy that was stirred around this relationship, unfortunately, just a couple of years back. And that, of course, marked a low in this particular relationship, and we hadn't seen any communication between the top leadership of both the countries until now. So how significant do you see this letter to be in terms of fostering this relationship further and developing into the enduring partnership that the US president states?
Yeah. So now I would be a little poetic in my opening remarks. You know, Pakistan-US relations are some kind of, are like punctuated by romance and reality, war and peace. I mean, it's a very interesting relationship. Since 50s that we engaged each other, it was the time when Pakistan was formulating its security policies, foreign policy, even the domestic policies. I'm talking of the Ayub Khan era. So basically, Pakistan-US relations go back as far as almost our history. Therefore, isolated events, certain setbacks, probably the relationship is able to, or are able to withstand. And I always remain, that's the reason, optimistic that these may be partial, but certainly the foundational relationship between the two would continue. Of course, with varying degree of engagement since the geostrategic priorities of US, which is a global power, change. Therefore, with that premise, I would say in the present context, uh, after coming into power, the new government in Islamabad, the letter written by Mr. Biden definitely is seen to be, at least as an observer for me, a reiteration of the US to continue to engage Pakistan. Because there are certain foundational engagement which the two countries cannot escape. Uh, First of all, by accident or by choice, Pakistan and US are engaged in war on terror regionally and globally. And also, with that, the security issues at the global level as well as the regional level, South Asia and Middle East, Pakistan has a role, and US cannot escape that engagement with Pakistan. And then, of course, Pakistan has been partner with the US and has a decisive kind of role in the nuclear non-proliferation in the world. And Pakistan has contributed positively and remains active on various forums which advocate nuclear non-proliferation. And then, of course, now we also have some kind of the engagement on climate change. So there are several issues in which we are engaged as on the bilateral as well as on the multilateral issues. And of course, Pakistan has been kind of thankful as well for US assistance in other social sectors, education, weather resilience, or mitigating the effects of the climate, especially after several cycles of disaster we've had in 2012, now to 2022. So I think the bottom line for my comment is that Pakistan-US relationships are historical. They are necessary for Pakistan and they are necessary for the US. The two cannot just divorce and walk away from that long historical relationship that we have, which is definitely mutually beneficial and, of course, beneficial for the peace and security of the globe. Yes, Asana.
Right, absolutely. Thank you for that. Michael, I noticed that you commented on X and you made two observations about the letter. You said that there's no congratulations to the Prime Minister, and you also added that there's no mention of counterterrorism. I'd like you to elaborate on both these aspects because they're important in this discussion.
And Michael, could you also add to this your view on the status of global war on terror? If I recollect correctly, during Donald Trump's time, the national security document had mentioned an end to the global war on terror and global competition to be the new norm.
Yes, thanks. First of all, it's indeed great to be back. It's been a while. I feel like it's a homecoming, so it's great to see friendly faces again. It's interesting. The U.S.-Pakistan relationship is in a notable state in that it's been downsized since the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. There's just not as much going on in the bilateral relationship, and yet it's in a very friendly place. There's no big tensions, and I think that's a reflection of this relationship over the years. That the more the two countries work together, the more they tend to run into problems. But then when they sort of step back a bit and are a bit more modest about cooperation, things actually work out well. So I think that's an important takeaway right now, that the relationship is completely or pretty much tension-free. But to get to your point, Sana, yes, I did notice that this letter was fairly routine, even anodyne in its tone. It was essentially looking forward to partnership with the Pakistani Prime Minister. And the areas of cooperation cited in the letter are essentially the key priorities that we've seen from the U.S. perspective for bilateral cooperation since the withdrawal from Afghanistan. So no surprise there. The U.S. had expressed some concerns about the election. So in that sense, it's not a surprise that the letter didn't offer any congratulations. It was focused much more about, let's continue this partnership, let's move on, let's just work on figuring out ways to collaborate. But yeah, the absence of mention of counterterrorism was notable, and I say that because when Assistant Secretary Donald Liu testified in Congress last week, when he was talking about U.S.-Pakistan relations, he was identifying what he saw as the top priorities, and he mentioned economics and climate change and all. He also mentioned counterterrorism. The reason that's interesting is that the U.S. government, or the Biden administration, has wanted to reframe or reset the relationship with Pakistan so that it's focused less on security issues, more on trade and economics. So for Liu, the senior most Pakistan-focused official at the State Department, to highlight CT, that I think is noteworthy. And of course, we look at what's happening in the state of play. Islamic State Khorasan is clearly developing a greater capacity to project an external threat far beyond Afghanistan. U.S. officials have been concerned about the growing threat that this group could pose to U.S. interests. And so I think that perhaps could provide some new opportunity for the U.S. and Pakistan to explore new forms of counterterrorism cooperation, given that, of course, ISK is based in Afghanistan. It projects a threat to Pakistan for sure as well. And so that might be an area of focus. But I do think that, given that the president in his letter said nothing about counterterrorism, that I think might be an indication that we shouldn't really be looking at that area for the most high growth possibilities for cooperation between the two countries. I think the focus will be more on trade, economics, climate change, energy, clean energy technologies, that type of thing.
Yeah, Michael, obviously. And by the way, you haven't answered my question regarding the global war on terror and its status, especially when it comes to U.S. priorities.
Right. Yeah. Sorry about that. I think that the ISK issue could change that. I mean, my sense is that the Biden administration wants to focus on its competition with China. Great power competition is a big focus here in Washington. The pivot to the Indo-Pacific, and of course these wars in Ukraine and Gaza and so on. I don't think that the U.S. views counterterrorism as a major global priority, though there's been a tendency for U.S. officials to prematurely declare the demise of terror groups, whether you're talking about Al-Qaeda or whether you're talking about Islamic State. So I think that given what's been happening with ISK of late, particularly this attack in Russia that U.S. officials believe ISK was responsible for, I think that suggests that we're not going to see a return of the global war on terror as we knew it several decades ago. But I think that there may be more of a sense of urgency in Washington to redirect more attention to that threat.
Yeah, Michael, obviously, whenever we talk about the cooperation between both of the countries, especially related to counter-terrorism cooperation, which we know that there was a time when, of course, U.S. left Pakistan with, all of the stingers, as it was famously said by Hillary Clinton once, that we left stingers and we left the Mujahideen and we asked ISI to you deal with it. And of course later phases of that 90s, US regretted going out of the region so swiftly. They were supposed to, of course, stay here and fix the mess which was created in Afghanistan, because that mess actually affected the whole region, for to say. And this time around, of course, this was the same this was the same point where, of course, once more US left Pakistan. But do you think coming back once more after just the time of 2.5 years back to Pakistan, do you think that these 2.5 years were a good lesson for US as well, that they shouldn't have been leaving the region in mess once more, and they have to, of course, continue their support to Pakistan that happens to be a long-term ally of US, and it is tried and tested, by the way. And this time around, of course, we know that though it is just the economic support and it is just the cooperation on the in the other sectors, but we all know that if economy is settled to Pakistan, if cooperation is extended to Pakistan, then of course Pakistan is self-sufficient to deal with all of the menace which is actually erupting from within three of the provinces of Afghanistan. Do you think that US has lost the time, but this time around we can say that they were hurriedly coming back so that it can be fixed?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. There continue to be debates here in Washington about whether it was right or wrong for the U.S. to withdraw when it did, and it's not a partisan debate. You've got prominent voices on both sides of both major parties, pro and con, in terms of withdrawal. People are still talking about it now. Now, look, things were pretty bad in Afghanistan when U.S. forces were still on the ground, and you had seen just how much the Taliban had been able to advance with territorial takeovers and so on, even with U.S. forces on the ground. Islamic State, Khorasan emerged after U.S. forces were already in the country. They were ramping up their attacks with U.S. forces still there. So, and of course, the Taliban was essentially in a position of power with the U.S. forces leaving. It was a tremendous embarrassment. They'd fought for nearly 20 years against the Taliban, and they retreated with the Taliban returning to power. So I think that it's not like things would have been better or good in Afghanistan, so to speak, had U.S. forces stayed. But indeed, I think that the manner in which the withdrawal happened was very chaotic and very humiliating for sure for U.S. officials, to the point that politically here in the U.S. it's sort of a hot potato that the Democrats don't really want to talk about it, because they know that their opponents will go after them for withdrawing in such a chaotic fashion. But no, I don't think that anyone in the administration regrets leaving. As I said before, there are other priorities that the administration wants to focus on now. And I think that taking a longer view, we have an election here, of course, in the U.S. in November. And I imagine that even if even if Donald Trump were to return as president, him and Biden have very similar views on Afghanistan. I don't think that President Trump would have any more of a desire to look a bit more closely at Afghanistan and think about whether it's time to step up counterterrorism activities in ways that could have impacts directly for Afghanistan. And it's a shame, particularly the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan. That's where I think the biggest need is. It's a big concern for the U.S., but because of the sanctions regime here in the U.S. on the Taliban regime, it's difficult for the U.S. to provide much support. That's why Pakistan theoretically could be very helpful, but of course Pakistan has its own troubled relationship with the Taliban right now. So it's one big mess for sure.
And we'll explore that further, Michael. But Ambassador Saab, I also want your take on what Michael earlier talked about in terms of the priorities that the U.S. has. And I understand that they have been stated in this letter as well. But of course, counterterrorism is one of our priorities as well in terms of the situation that we're dealing with. Is this something that we're communicating with the U.S. and is this something that we can actually see foster moving forward, given the fact that it doesn't seem to be the top priority at the moment with the United States? How do we move ahead with this?
Yeah, you see, the fight against terrorism seems to have changed its form. I think not only the terrorists themselves have organized themselves differently. Of course, they are using the violent methods, but more than that is other methods as well, the soft method they have acquired. That is creating some kind of an anti-Americanism in the Muslim world. I think that appears to me one of the major issues that the US must be looking at. And perhaps Pakistan could help understand this problem and come up with some kind of a collaborative approach to this problem. But as far as Afghanistan is concerned, I would like to take a rather more serious view of it, because there were assessments that probably ISIS would be able to launch international attack within 6 months to a year. And what has happened in Moscow, should it not alarm the international community? I think it should. And I think this is where I think a collaborative effort is required. And not that I want to justify some kind of a Pakistan's interest to really again engage, but I'm just stating a reality which exists on ground, that any action, any counterterrorism effort in order to control international terrorism in Afghanistan, Pakistan is the pathway in terms of already institutional information that we have, we already have a long history of dealing with the various groups there. We understand it, although now we are the victims of that very thing. But I think Afghanistan, in my view, cannot be just left at its own. I think 2 years is enough time. We would have expected the Taliban to really behave like a normal state, be able to control its territory, not allow any non-state actors to undermine its sovereignty and launch attacks on other countries, including its neighbors, that is Pakistan, for example. TTP is a challenge, but it could, in my view, it is possible that this would further, it could it could change and it increase the level of threat to the international community. Because I think we cannot just sit back and say that probably the 2000s stage would not come where everybody came together. And I think we still see international terrorism for various reasons, because they're getting the causes. What is happening in Gaza, for example, what is happening in Yemen. So we cannot ignore. They are, because the issue with the terrorism is that when you provide them with the causes, when you provide them with the justifications for their terrorist activities, this is where we have to start working, and we have to collaborate and cooperate. Neither Pakistan alone can fight, nor Afghanistan, neither can US can fight. So I think there is still a need for the continued cooperation and collaboration. But you are right, that it has been scaled down. At least on the face of it, we don't see that kind of that kind of engagement on that. But we are happy that US is now engaging more on education, on economic collaboration, on investment, which we definitely welcome as a country. Yes, please.
Absolutely, sir. Michael, I have two very quick questions for you. One is regarding the domestic ramifications of such a letter. Earlier, you actually brought up Donald Lu's hearing, and of course, something was driving that, perhaps PTI's support on ground, that might have compelled the lawmakers to actually organize that hearing. So now when the Biden administration actually extends the olive branch, do you think that it is going to have an impact on the domestic vote base when it comes to coming elections? Because you mentioned elections also. The second thing is the recent exchange that took place between Afghanistan and Pakistan. Regarding terrorism and the kind of altercation we had. How is Washington viewing this development?
And also add to the second question, the audio message that we've also seen from the Afghan Taliban leadership talking about how the war with the US is not over yet, and we continue to go ahead with it. And there's also, of course, talks with regards to the way that they're going to be putting forward Islamic principles and laws according to them, and going forward with punishments for women and the rest, something which is completely against what was previously termed as assurances given by the Taliban before, of course, the US troop withdrawal. So how does the US take this audio message, and what is being done about that?
Michael, you'll have to unmute yourself. Yeah, there's...
Sorry about that. I'll take your second question first. Absolutely, the latest messaging from the Taliban has been received with great concern here in Washington, though I don't think anyone who seriously understands the Taliban and Afghanistan is surprised by this messaging. I mean, it's quite clear that the Taliban ideologically have not really changed at all since when they were last in power in the 1990s. But again, given that the U.S. relationship with Afghanistan is so limited, there's not much going on. There's humanitarian aid being provided. There are periodic engagements between U.S. leaders and Taliban officials in which U.S. officials try to inquire about the plight of the small number of Americans still remaining in Afghanistan. And there are some other exchanges about a number of other things, but not much. So I think that the fact, given that the relationship or the way in which the U.S. views Afghanistan and the relationship with it, there's not much going on. I don't think that these latest messages coming from Taliban leaders are going to make a major impact or have a major impact on U.S. policy. But just one quick note on the CT issue on terrorism. I think it is important to highlight a critical disconnect here. Unfortunately, the U.S.-Pakistan relationship is a story of disconnects. There are some differing priorities. As you well know, TTP is the main terrorism concern for Pakistan, whereas for the U.S., because TTP, though it recognizes it's dangerous, it doesn't target Americans or threaten Americans anymore. It appears to be focusing its fight completely on Pakistan, Pakistanis, security forces, police, not as much civilians. The U.S. is very concerned about ISK because it is projecting a global threat, and it has hit the United States before. I mean, let's face it, the administration hasn't forgotten about the ISK attack outside the Kabul airport during the final days of the withdrawal, which killed dozens of Afghans and also, I believe, 13 American service persons. So there's a bit of a disconnect there on the counterterrorism front. To the first question about the domestic implications here of the Biden letter, I don't think there would be that many, and I don't necessarily see it as connected to the hearing with Donald Liu. I think the administration was very much aware of that hearing, particularly because Assistant Secretary Liu was speaking at it. But the State Department generally runs the relationship with Pakistan as it wishes. It's not necessarily going to be influenced by what members of Congress are doing or what members of Congress are saying. So in that sense, the relationship hasn't changed. That hearing with well, he is an ambassador, but Assistant Secretary Liu did not really impact the way that the U.S. administration wanted to go about this relationship with Pakistan. And we've seen that again. Biden's letter essentially is emphasizing continuity, the same themes, the same focus areas that have been in place for this relationship since the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan.
Ambassador Baloch, supposedly that this all actually leads to a point where, of course, America does, see some concerns, of course, popping up from within Afghanistan, and that are a concern, a true concern for the Americans as well. And we get into an alliance once more, and that is, of course, a military alliance against that menace. Can we say that, as we know, that very recently India was given Sea Guardian Predators drones in context of South China Sea? Can we say that our alliance with the US would be of that nature, where we can ask for Sky Guardians from America to, of course, use them against the ISIS Khorasan ducking inside Afghanistan?
Let's see, we have to be realistic and we have to think strategically. The US-India relationship has a different nature. Pakistan-US relation is different, given the strategic position and strategic size of the two countries. India, we know, is now definitely part of that pivot to the east policy and strategic policy of US. It's a member of the Quad. It has huge strategic now relationship with the US, where they have the interoperability of the naval forces. They have even an agreement for servicing their warships. So, and obviously that is focused on China, and that strategic competition between the existing global power and the aspiring global power, Indian role comes there. While I think I'll not overstate Pakistan's role. We have a limited role in terms of fitting into the US strategy, regional or global. I think we definitely have a smaller role. I think we have to be realistic. We should continue to build on the complementarities. As has been said before, and I like to reiterate, that at the regional level, where we can use our expertise, we have a history of dealing with Afghanistan. The only one worry I have, that I have a rather pessimistic view of Taliban, one way or the other, taming down to become a normal state, it will be very difficult. I see it further like getting into a state of dysfunction. It is a dysfunctioning state, Afghanistan, and there seems to be no attempt by Afghanistan, and it refuses to seek any assistance from the international community, even its neighbors. So I think that might become a sore point where, by force, by compulsion of circumstances, Pakistan and US will have to re-engage to see what to do with the situation in Afghanistan when it comes to seeing the threat of international terrorism re-emerge. But we have to be very clear that we cannot compare US-India relationship since they are in global and strategic priorities, reprioritization of the US global power politics, while US-Pakistan relationship are kind of more limited, more focused on the South Asia region. Of course, Southwest Asia as well, we have a position. But we are more, I think, important and relevant being a nuclear state, being a positive contributor to the nuclear non-proliferation, being a very positive and proactive in the climate change negotiation between the South, North, and the South. And I think all other development agenda of the global development agenda where Pakistan has been playing a role and should continue to cooperate and collaborate with all other great powers, including the US. Yes, Sarah.
Right, absolutely. Michael, my last question is going to be with reference to our relationship with Russia. And of course, this is a dynamic that has been talked about previously as well. Unfortunately, was part of a lot of controversy in Pakistan as well. But even if we talk about, devoid of that controversy, even if we talk about whether or not this is going to be a precarious situation, I want to understand moving forward, what sort of concerns will the US have regarding this relationship, and how much will this impact our relationship with the US, and particularly also in terms of the way that people perceive the US and Pakistan relationship as well, both within the United States and in Pakistan, because a lot of what we view within Pakistan as well is taken with this lens and understood with this lens for this conditionality and others, and that is only the way forward that a lot of people believe the relationship exists, and how is that going to be countered?
And Michael, since we are talking about Russia, and of course the US policy has been focused more on China, as was pointed out by Ambassador, and there has been recently some kind of confrontation between Russia and America. Do you think that there is a possibility of a rethink on Russia policy, because somehow it is perceived that the current policy might be delivering Russia to China or China to Russia?
And Michael, with your permission, as we were talking about the rethink, very recently we've got a statement from US related to Iran-Pakistan gas pipeline as well. Will there be a rethink on that too? Once more, if you can
unmute the mic
yourself, please.
My apologies. Sorry about that. That last point about Iran is particularly critical. Very briefly, those are some great questions. Look, the U.S., I would argue that the Cold War never ended from a U.S. perspective. The U.S.-Russia relationship has been hostile, really, for so many years post-Cold War. And so, the U.S. is not inclined to favor any country's any of its friends having deep relations with Russia. India is an exception, just because, as our distinguished panelists said before, the U.S.-India relationship is a very special one, and India certainly gets free passes from the U.S. that many other countries don't get, and that includes India's special relationship with Russia. But I think with Pakistan, I don't think that the administration is that concerned about any sense of a Pakistani relationship with Russia, just because it's a relatively modest relationship. I mean, yes, indeed, in recent months, Pakistan has started to import Russian oil, but the Pakistani ambassador to the U.S., speaking at the Wilson Center, in fact, some months ago, he said that essentially that was an agreement, that agreement to start importing oil from Russia. It was made after some consultations with the U.S. So clearly, the U.S. was okay with that. But I think the Iran factor is much more serious. There's recognition in Washington that Pakistan appears to be pushing forward with this pipeline, which U.S. clearly does not want Pakistan to deal with. And that's a much more substantive, tangible goal for Pakistan vis-a-vis Iran than any type of goals it has with Russia, other than importing modest amounts of energy. And, we heard Assistant Secretary Liu say at the hearing last week that, there could be problems for the U.S. relationship with Pakistan if Pakistan goes ahead and does this deal, this gas deal with Iran. So Pakistan will apparently apply for a waiver, a sanctions waiver. I don't think the U.S. would be in any mood to give it. This, to me, seems like a huge brewing diplomatic and foreign policy conundrum for Pakistan. So, yeah, that Iran factor, I think, is much more significant in this context of U.S.-Pakistan relations than the Russia factor is. Very briefly, in terms of how Pakistan is seen here, the U.S.-Pakistan relationship, things are changing. I mean, there was a time when Pakistan's image was dreadful here in the U.S., but the nature of the relationship has changed, which means that perceptions are changing. The U.S. is no longer complaining about Pakistani policies or actions in Afghanistan vis-a-vis its relationship with the Taliban or whatever the case may be. And meanwhile, the Pakistani American community has really grown here in recent years. It's nowhere near as large as the Indian or the Chinese or the Korean communities, but it's very large. And I think that diasporas can provide a boost for soft power. And I think that's been really helpful with Pakistani Americans in this country, explaining to Americans what Pakistan is all about, shattering myths, all of that. So that definitely helps. And I think by extension, that helps U.S.-Pakistan relations on the whole.
Right, absolutely. Ambassador Saab, quickly, I also want your take with reference to people's opinion about these relationships, particularly if we talk about the people of Pakistan and how they're viewing this relationship. Unfortunately, because of the controversy in the last couple of years, even previously, we've seen that there is this perception with regards to this relationship that has a negative connotation. Can you elaborate further on how we can actually work on this, and what is the basic source of that?
And Ambassador BALUCH, is it, all of this notion by the people, of course people do think about this, that, there are double standards by US when it comes to dealing with Pakistan, and it's, of course, Eastern for India. It has a lot to do with this as well, because when we talk about the gas pipeline, of course, we are seeing a different stance by the US. But when we talk about India, India is still buying almost 330 barrels a day, 330,000 barrels a day crude oil. They are still buying from Iran, and there are no concerns shown by, of course, US over the Indians.
Yeah, I think, again, I'll reiterate that we should not compare US-India relations when we calibrate our own interest. I think we should, as a nation, as a sovereign state, we should take our decisions depending on our vital national interest. And of course, the economic and fuel security is our vital national interest. So I'm sure all our institutions will come together and take a decision accordingly on the Iran-Pakistan pipeline. This is the short answer to a very long question. As far as now perception of the people is concerned, yes. In fact, I'm working on a small paper that how public opinion really affects and impacts the behavior of the states. So it does actually. And to some extent, the letter that we received, that not very warm, rather very stale, to be very, very, very frank, might have had the impact of that hearing in which Pakistan diaspora elements associated to a certain political party were active. But I only wish that our diaspora in the US should become our strategic asset. It should become part of our soft power. It should be able to help Pakistan, promote Pakistan in the US, make US understand the real Pakistan, because real Pakistan is not what otherwise international media tends to portray. The real Pakistan, you might have seen, Mr. Michael, is beautiful, hospitable, pragmatic, intelligent, entrepreneurial. And that all these elements we need to project outside. And in my opinion, in coming days, the public opinion will be a very decisive factor in the determination and direction of the foreign policy of the all the countries, but especially the big powers, because more and more public opinion is taking space in the decision-making corridors, because especially those which are the parliamentary democracies. So I think they are our asset, and we should use them. We should use them as our soft power, as also Mr. Michael said it. And some of them, they really are, because I've been in the US, I see some of the very, very good Pakistanis serving tremendously good job for Pakistan. Yes, please.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Ambassador G.R. BALUCH, and thank you, Michael Kugelman, for joining us and being a part of this discussion today. That's all that we have time for with regards to our first segment. We hope that we see this relationship flourish, but we're going to take a quick look at what is going on in India also with regards to the crackdown that we've seen on opposition parties, and we talked about this yesterday as well. Particularly the Congress party, of course, is accusing the state of crippling it economically with regards to the elections and what it has referred to, Faisal, as tax terrorism. What do you make of that?
Yeah, obviously, you know, when we talk about Indian politics, today's politics, it is going on. Of course, if we talk about the Congress, I mean, very fresh, we have seen that there is a, you know, a fine, a tax which is going to be imposed on them, 218 million, of course, dollars we're talking about here. They literally want to bankrupt Congress. And if we talk about the other prominent party, which is on the northern Indian side, that is, of course, Aam Aadmi Party and its chief, who happens to be CM of, you know, Delhi, and of course, Kejriwal is inside the behind the bars, and of course, he's running the affairs of the government from behind the bars. Reason, there is only one reason that in today's India, we are seeing that there is, you know, BJP's government, and BJP wants the, you know, the total affairs of the country. It wants to control the whole country through you know, illegitimate means. They are you know, going to any length that can be actually helpful in you know, making it all their own. Previously, you know, what we saw, that if we you know, talk about the northeastern states, of course, they have been controlling with different means. Methi tribe was one of them. Yesterday, we gave the example of Manipur, the way they are, you know, controlling all of them states. If we talk about, you know, northern states, they are running lots of affairs in which, of course, they are making sure that there are religious affairs in which they are, you know, scrutinizing people, and they are forcing people to take their side. And they are actually, you know, marginalizing all of the minorities, and so that even within the secular voices are being, you know, treated in a way in which, of course, they have to give up their struggle in India, in today's India. And what we are seeing is that the coming government, as you know, Farrukh highlighted yesterday, that we might be seeing that more empowered BJP might be, you know, coming up in the coming up elections. Reason being that the kind of strategies they are applying on, it will be, of course, seen in coming days that their foes, their political foes, they will be facing lots of other challenges, and in the midst of it, of course, we will be seeing that the BJP would be more empowered. Of course, totalitarian India will be seeing in coming future. It can be considered as a, you know, dictatorship earned through a democracy, illegitimate democracy of India.
Okay, Farrukh, the Congress party leaders have also talked about their confidence in the law, that they're saying that they are sure of the legal protection that is going to give to them, but they're saying there's just not going to be enough time with regards to the elections, even if they take up this case. Do you agree with that? Is the judiciary independent in India?
I will not agree with anything that anybody says in India these days, because they are certainly under a lot of distress. By the way, just to clarify the quote that Faisal was referring to, I didn't say that they are just going to win comfortably because of the tactics they are using. I said that there are good chances that they might even expand their current support and presence in Lok Sabha, despite not, even if they did not actually indulge in these methods, because clearly a counterpoint to BJP seems to be missing, and they have a lot of money. Remember electoral bond issue. But to answer your question, Sana, I just wanted to actually start with a tangent away from this. And let me actually give you an example. Russia's television, RT's head was recently questioned by an American journalist, and the journalist asked, why is it that you're talking about your election as fair and free, but why is it that there was no credible challenger? And the answer that came back from the RT's head was, why do you think there's a need for such a challenger, right? And the person said that, excuse me, democracy. And then she lectures them on how we don't want American system, why do you want to impose your system, right? Now, it seems that despite being such a celebrated ally of the US, India seems to be actually migrating to Putin's sphere of influence or wisdom, right? In India, gradually we have seen that all opposition parties have been dismantled, literally dismantled. How? There are 2 or 3 enforcement techniques that they are using, 2 ITs and 1 ED. Enforcement directorate goes and tries to arrest whosoever they want, and then IT cell, that is the information technology cell, that is propaganda cell on social media, and income tax, the 2 ITs. Income tax has been doing great jobs for BJP. For example, when BBC decides to run a documentary on Narendra Modi that was essentially about his government in Gujarat some 20 years ago, all of a sudden income tax group actually descends upon the office of BBC, and they have to actually take back that documentary. It is banned from India. Similarly, now do you know, Faisal was giving you a number in dollars. Let me tell you what that notice amounts to in Indian rupee. 18 billion rupees. One party is being asked, when you have already frozen their accounts, to cough up 18 billion rupees before the elections.
Yeah.
And that is the state of affairs that in one of the states in India, the head of Congress had to actually go to the media and say that we don't have any money, please allow us to actually run our campaigns on credit, and when we come to power we are going to give you back that money. So with that kind of a situation, I think that India is gradually moving away from how democracy is perceived all over the world. Because India has a very bad memory of democratic eras. They keep on complaining about the emergency, but their actual memory is about those hung parliaments where very shaky governments used to come. So they want to actually keep on building up Narendra Modi, and he will continue. What I don't get is, why do you need 400 seats in the Lok Sabha? Why do you have to bend over backwards and distort the system when you could have taken the whole polity for 5 more years without any trouble?
Right.
Why do you have to actually give bad name to India's democracy? And this is the kind of wisdom that we keep on worrying about, but we don't understand what is going on.
Absolutely. Thank you, Farrukh, and thank you, Faisal, for joining us in the debate. That's all that we have time for. We're now going to see you Monday.